Tonight on Sleepless Mythology, we're floating back to a time when the gods still parted way too hard, divine etiquette was confusing at best, and one golden fruit caused the worst breakup in mythological history. Before we begin, please comment where you are and what time it is so we can see who's joining us from around the world. It's fascinating to discover where you're tuning in from. Now, close your eyes, sink into the covers, take a deep breath and release it, relaxing your face, shoulders and the rest of your body. Let your thoughts slow, and let this very old tale carry you gently into slumber. In the grand scheme of cosmic blunders, forgetting to invite the goddess of discord to your wedding ranks somewhere between stealing Zeus's lightning bolt and telling Hera her peacocks look fat. Yet here we are, about to witness how one social faux pas managed to launch 1,000 ships and give Homer enough material for 2 epic poems plus a few dramatic monologues. Picture, if you will, Mount Olympus in its heyday. The air sparkled with divine energy, the nectar flowed like, well, nectar, and the gods were doing what they did best, making questionable life choices with eternal consequences. Zeus, master of poor decisions and spectacular cover-ups, had a problem on his hands. A prophecy declared that the sea nymph Thetis would bear a son greater than his father. Now, Zeus, who had already deposed one father and wasn't keen on making it a family tradition, did some quick divine mathematics. Thetis plus Zeus equals potential usurper. Thetis plus random mortal equals someone else's problem. And thus, with the kind of logic that only makes sense after several cups of ambrosia, Zeus decided to marry off the powerful, beautiful, definitely not interested Thetis to a mortal named Peleus. The fact that Peleus was a hero with excellent bone structure and washboard abs was purely coincidental. Probably. The wedding preparations were spectacular. The muses were booked for the ceremony, though they insisted on creative control of the playlist. Dionysus was put in charge of beverages, which everyone agreed was either the best or worst decision possible with no middle ground. Hephaestus forged wedding rings that could double as brass knuckles, a thoughtful touch, given the bride's tendency to shapeshift when annoyed. The guest list was a who's who of divine society. Athena RSVP'd with a detailed critique of the seating arrangement. Apollo promised to keep his poetry readings under 3 hours. Aphrodite sent ahead 17 outfit changes, and a note asking if she could bring a +7. Even Hades emerged from the underworld, though he spent most of his time complaining about the sunshine and asking if anyone had seen his wife. She was hiding behind a column, stress-eating pomegranate seeds. But then came the decision. Someone, and nobody later wanted to admit who, suggested that perhaps inviting Eris, goddess of discord, strife, and that feeling you get when you realise you've been arguing on the internet for 6 hours might not be the best idea for a wedding. She'll probably just start fights, they said. Remember what happened at the last Olympic Games? Others muttered. I'm still finding snakes in my sandals from her last party trick, Hermes added. And so in a moment of collective divine wisdom, which, let's be honest, was about as reliable as a prophecy from a discount oracle, they decided not to invite Eris. The universe held its breath. The fates reached for popcorn, and somewhere in the cosmic darkness, Eris smiled. When Eris discovered her invitation had apparently been lost in the Olympian mail system, as if Hermes ever misdelivered anything, she didn't immediately unleash plagues or turn everyone's wine into warm pickle juice. No, Eris understood something fundamental about chaos. The best kind doesn't explode, it simmers, marinates, and comes dressed in gold. In her private chambers, which looked like what would happen if a tornado had a love child with an antique shop, Eris began to scheme. She pulled out her special occasions chest, the one labelled in case of social snub, right next to the box marked ideas too chaotic even for me, and just below receipts for Zeus's questionable purchases, blackmail material. Let's see, she mused, while her pet ravens played catch with a cursed ruby. I could release a pack of golden wolves to eat all the wedding gifts. No, too obvious. Perhaps swap everyone's personalities for the day? No, with this crowd, would anyone even notice? Her fingers drummed against her throne of mismatched furniture parts as she brainstormed. Then she saw it. A perfect golden apple sitting in her fruit bowl, because even chaos goddesses need their daily servings of fruit. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands as a smile worthy of 1,000 mischief makers spread across her face. Simple, she whispered, but elegant. She spent the next few hours carefully engraving the words "to the fairest" into the apple's surface. Not with magic, mind you, she did it by hand because sometimes the old ways are the best ways, and because nothing says petty quite like personally carving your revenge message letter by letter. The inscription was in ancient Greek, but somehow managed to look both passive-aggressive and Comic Sans. This was a particular talent of Eris's, making even the most elegant script somehow radiate spite. As for the apple itself, it wasn't just any golden apple. This was premium chaos fruit, polished to such a shine that Narcissus would have left his reflection for it. It was the kind of apple that made Snow White's poisoned fruit look like something from the bargain bin. But the true genius wasn't in the apple itself, it was in the timing and target audience. Eris knew her fellow goddesses well. She knew Hera's imperial pride, Athena's competitive streak, and Aphrodite's inability to pass up a beauty contest. She knew that these three powerful, intelligent, absolutely terrifying goddesses had exactly one thing in common. None of them could resist a challenge to their divine ego. The plan was perfect. No blood would be spilled, at least not directly by her hand. No immediate violence would occur, that would come later. And best of all, she wouldn't have to sit through another divine wedding ceremony, where Apollo insisted on performing his latest 9-hour epic poem about that time he saw a particularly inspiring tree. As she got ready for her party-crashing debut, Eris put on her finest chaos couture, dress that seemed to be made of shadows and sparkles, which also may or may not have been alive. Her hair arranged itself into an artfully messy style that suggested both "I just rolled out of bed" and "I could end your whole existence." "Time to make an entrance," she told her ravens, who were now wearing tiny bow ties because even chaos needs accessories. "Let's show them why you don't leave discord off the guest list." The wedding reception was in full swing when Eris arrived. Apollo was on his 5th encore of Sweet Chariot of Fire. Dionysus had already turned 3 minor deities into various wine-related shrubs, and Zeus was pretending not to notice that Hera had caught him slipping his room key to a cloud nymph. Eris materialised at the entrance like a fabulous thundercloud at a garden party. Her dress, which defied both physics and fashion laws, rippled with shadows that occasionally formed themselves into tiny middle fingers. The ravens on her shoulders were now wearing not just bow ties, but also tiny top hats, because if you're going to crash Olympus's wedding of the century, your birds better be dressed for the occasion. The first to notice her was Hermes, who nearly dropped his caduceus into the punch bowl. He quickly began calculating how many messages of apology he'd have to deliver after whatever was about to happen. "Oh, don't mind me," Eris announced to no one in particular, her voice carrying that special tone that guaranteed everyone would, in fact, mind her very much. "I just came to offer my congratulations to the happy couple, and to deliver a small gift, something modest, barely worth mentioning really." She glided through the crowd, which parted before her like the Red Sea before Moses, if Moses had been wearing chaos couture and carrying a spite apple. Gods who normally prided themselves on their bravery suddenly found their ambrosia cups fascinating. Even the muses stopped mid-song, creating what might have been the first awkward silence in divine history. The golden apple was nestled in her palm, catching the light in ways that made it look almost innocent. If you ignored the fact that it was practically vibrating with chaotic energy and occasionally whispered suggestions for starting arguments. Eris approached the main table where Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite were seated, engaged in what appeared to be a passive-aggressive conversation about who had the most temples. Perfect timing. "Oh my," Eris said, her voice dripping with fake surprise. "What's this? A golden apple? How curious. And look, it seems to have an inscription. To the fairest. Well, I couldn't possibly decide who deserves such a prize. I'll just leave it here, shall I?" With the precision of a master chaos artist, she released the apple. It rolled across the table in slow motion, leaving a trail of golden sparkles and bad decisions in its wake. The apple came to rest exactly between the three goddesses, its inscription gleaming like a divine subtweet. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear Athena's brain calculating combat scenarios, Hera's eyebrow reaching new heights of disdain, and Aphrodite's perfect lips curving into a smile that had launched several previous conflicts. Eris stepped back to admire her handiwork, adjusting her raven's top hats for optimal dramatic effect. "Well, don't let me interrupt the festivities. I'm sure you can sort this out amongst yourselves. After all, what's the worst that could happen?" The tension at the table could have been cut with Artemis's hunting knife, if she hadn't been too busy placing bets with Apollo on what would happen next. The three goddesses stared at the apple as if it might spontaneously declare a winner, while the rest of the party guests tried to look like they weren't watching while absolutely watching. Hera spoke first, her voice carrying that special tone of divine authority that suggested everyone else was already wrong. "Well, clearly this belongs to me. I'm the Queen of Olympus. Being the fairest is practically in my job description." She reached for the apple with all the confidence of someone who had never lost an argument with Zeus, mainly because Zeus was too scared to argue. "How interesting," Athena cut in, her grey eyes gleaming with strategic calculations. "I wasn't aware that fairest was a hereditary position. By that logic, we should give it to Cronus. Oh wait, we can't. He's in Tartarus." She smiled the kind of smile that had preceded several successful military campaigns. Aphrodite, who had been quietly reapplying her lipstick, which somehow made her look even more devastating, laughed like tinkling bells with hidden razor blades. "Darlings, are we really doing this? I literally emerged from sea foam looking perfect. Beauty is my entire brand. The apple practically has my name on it." Meanwhile, Eris had found herself a comfortable spot near the nectar fountain, conjured a chair made of crystallized chaos, and was enjoying the show. Her ravens were passing out as tiny bags of ambrosia-flavoured popcorn to the minor deities. The argument escalated quickly. Hera pointed out that she had the best posture of anyone in the pantheon. Athena countered that true beauty came from wisdom, and that she had invented literally everything useful. Aphrodite reminded them both that she could make mountains crumble with a well-timed hair flip. Zeus, watching this unfold and seeing his peaceful wedding reception devolving into a divine beauty pageant, did what any wise ruler would do. He tried to delegate the problem. His eyes scanned the crowd desperately until they landed on Paris, the mortal shepherd prince who had been invited because, well, actually, no one quite remembered why he was there. "Paris!" Zeus boomed, with the desperate relief of someone finding a volunteer for a dangerous mission. "Yes, you, the mortal trying to hide behind that column. Congratulations, you've just been selected for a very special honour." Paris, who had been enjoying the free food and hoping nobody would notice him, suddenly found himself the centre of attention. "I have?" "Yes, you'll be judging which of these three powerful, easily offended goddesses is the fairest. Won't that be fun?" The colour drained from Paris's face as he realised he was now in charge of making a decision that would definitely anger at least two immortal beings. The kind of beings who could turn people into trees, or worse, make them listen to Apollo's poetry. The three goddesses turned their attention to Paris like predators spotting a particularly interesting gazelle. Hera's crown gleamed ominously. Athena's owl familiar started sharpening its talons. Aphrodite's smile grew just a bit wider, and somewhere in the background, Eris was having the time of her immortal life. The judging took place in a secluded garden on Mount Olympus, though calling it a judging was like calling the Trojan War a minor disagreement. Each goddess got a private audience with Paris, who was seriously regretting every life choice that had led him to this moment. Hera went first, sweeping in with the confidence of someone who had Zeus's lightning bolts on speed dial. She circled Paris like a perfectly coiffed vulture, her peacock feather dress rustling with promises of power. "Listen, sweetie," she said, adjusting her crown in a way that somehow emphasized both its weight and the fact that she had more like it at home. "Let's talk about what really matters here. Beauty, please. I'm offering you power. Real power. How does King of all Asia sound? Think about it. Armies at your command, endless wealth, people writing songs about how great you are, and all you have to do is give me that tiny little apple, which, by the way, obviously belongs to me." Paris, who had been a shepherd approximately 10 minutes ago, tried to imagine ruling Asia while also remembering how to breathe. Before he could respond, Hera added casually, "Of course, if you choose someone else, I suppose accidents could happen. Tragic ones involving lightning, but I'm sure that won't be necessary." She exited with a regal wave that somehow managed to convey both benediction and threat. Next came Athena, who had traded her battle armour for a sophisticated chiton that somehow still looked ready for war. She didn't bother with circling. Instead, she produced a series of scrolls, charts, and a PowerPoint presentation. She'd invented those too, apparently. "Paris," she began in the tone of a professor who knows you haven't done the reading. "Let's approach this logically. I'm offering you military genius, strategic brilliance, the kind of wisdom that makes other people's plans look like they were conceived by particularly dim sheep. You'll never lose a battle. You'll be the cleverest ruler in history. Your name will be synonymous with wisdom itself." She paused to let this sink in, then added with a slight smirk, "Also, I noticed you've been having trouble with that new sundial. I could help you figure out how to read it, and maybe teach you what all those squiggly marks in books mean." Paris, who had indeed been pretending to understand sundials for weeks, found himself nodding despite himself. But then came Aphrodite, where Hera had brought intimidation and Athena had brought intellectual superiority. Aphrodite brought, well, herself. She didn't so much walk into the garden as allow it to rearrange itself around her presence. Flowers spontaneously bloomed, then blushed and turned away because they felt inadequate. "Paris, darling," she purred, and somehow made those two words sound like poetry. "Why complicate things with politics and warfare? Those are so messy." She wrinkled her perfect nose. "I'm offering you something much simpler. Love. Not just any love. I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that smelled of roses and questionable decisions. "Her name is Helen. Helen of Sparta. And yes, she's technically married to King Menelaus, but..." She waved her hand dismissively. "Details, details. I'll make her fall madly in love with you. It'll be terribly romantic." Paris, whose brain had basically short-circuited at this point, managed to squeak out, "Isn't stealing someone's wife kind of wrong?" Aphrodite laughed like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "Oh, sweetie, morality is so last century. Besides, what could possibly go wrong?" Paris, demonstrating the decision-making skills of someone who'd spent most of his life talking to sheep, did what any young man faced with 3 powerful goddesses would do. He thought with his heart. And by heart, we mean something significantly lower. "The apple goes to Aphrodite," he declared, with all the gravitas of someone signing their own death warrant while trying to look cool about it. The reaction was immediate and exactly as catastrophic as you'd expect. The sky darkened, thunder rolled. Somewhere in the distance, a peacock screamed. Hera's face went through so many expressions of rage that she invented several new ones. Her final expression was somewhere between, "I will turn you into a particularly ugly toad and your entire bloodline will regret this for generations." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was eloquent enough to fill several volumes of threats. Athena, ever the strategist, simply nodded once. But it was the kind of nod that had preceded the fall of several civilizations. "Interesting choice," she said, in a tone that suggested Paris should start sleeping with one eye open. "Very interesting. I do hope you're good at preventing your city from burning down." Aphrodite, meanwhile, was practically glowing with triumph. She cradled the golden apple like a favourite pet, occasionally holding it up so it would catch the light and blind anyone looking in her direction. "Excellent decision, Paris, darling. I knew you had good taste. Now, about that promised wife." The wedding reception, which had been suspended in a state of divine anticipation, erupted into chaos. The muses immediately began composing tragic ballads about Paris's imminent doom. Dionysus started passing out extra strong wine, declaring that everyone was going to need it. Apollo tried to lighten the mood with a prophecy, but nobody wanted to hear how many people were going to die. It was a lot. In the midst of all this, Eris was having the time of her immortal life. She had upgraded her chaos throne to include cup holders and was sharing ambrosia roasted peanuts with her ravens while watching the show. "Now this," she declared to no one in particular, "is what I call entertainment." Zeus, realising that his perfectly planned wedding had devolved into a preview of coming attractions for the Trojan War, did what he did best. He pretended nothing was wrong while quietly checking the structural integrity of Mount Olympus's lightning-proof bunker. Meanwhile, back in Sparta, Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world and soon-to-be catalyst for the biggest military campaign in Greek history, was going about her day, blissfully unaware that she had just become the prize in the world's most disastrous beauty pageant aftermath. Thanks to Aphrodite's divine travel planning service, first class on a magic cloud, complimentary nectar, Paris arrived in Sparta looking like a snack in his finest Trojan prince attire. He had spent the entire journey practicing his "I'm totally here for diplomatic reasons and not to steal your wife" speech, which he planned to deliver to King Menelaus. Menelaus, being a gracious host and apparently having skipped the basic security measures against attractive foreign princes chapter in his king manual, welcomed Paris with open arms. He even gave him a tour of the palace, proudly showing off his collection of precious metals, rare weapons, and, most fatally, his gorgeous wife Helen. Now, Helen was the kind of beautiful that made poets forget how words worked. Her face had indeed launched several previous ships, though usually just pleasure cruises. When she entered a room, people forgot their own names, stubbed their toes on furniture, and occasionally walked into columns. She was, to put it mildly, a knockout. But she was also intelligent, which meant that when this suspiciously well-groomed Trojan prince showed up making eyes at her across the dinner table, she was immediately suspicious. However, Aphrodite had already started working her divine magic, which meant Helen suddenly found herself thinking things like, "My husband's beard is looking particularly crumb-filled today," and "This Paris fellow has really mastered the smouldering gaze technique." Aphrodite, never one for subtle matchmaking, basically hit them both with the ancient Greek equivalent of love arrows. The goddess enhanced Paris's natural charm to 11, though she couldn't do much about his common sense, which remained firmly at 0, and made Helen see him as the answer to all her prayers, including ones she hadn't even prayed yet. The actual stealing part went something like this. Paris: "Want to see my cool boat?" Helen: "Is this a metaphor?" Paris: "No, I literally have a boat. But also, yes, it's totally a metaphor." Helen: "Won't my husband be mad?" Aphrodite, invisibly spraying more love perfume. Who cares about husbands when you have destiny, Helen? You make some compelling points. And so, while Menelaus was away at his grandfather's funeral, timing that was suspicious enough to suggest Aphrodite had been doing some creative calendar management, Helen and Paris made their great escape. They packed up Helen's favourite chitons, some choice pieces of Spartan treasure, because why not add theft to adultery, and enough hair products to maintain Helen's legendary locks during their sea voyage. The getaway itself was like a romantic comedy, if romantic comedies usually ended in decade-long wars. They had to dodge palace guards, navigate through a conveniently placed fog, thanks Aphrodite, and deal with Helen's last-minute packing crisis. But what if Troy doesn't have my favourite face cream? As they sailed away from Sparta, Helen probably should have felt guilty. Instead, thanks to Aphrodite's premium love spell package, she was too busy admiring how Paris's hair caught the moonlight and thinking up couple nicknames for them. Paris, meanwhile, was congratulating himself on pulling off the greatest romantic heist in history, blissfully unaware that he had just set in motion events that would lead to his city being turned into a very large bonfire. Menelaus returned from his grandfather's funeral expecting the usual, a warm welcome, some light kingdom management, maybe a nice dinner with his wife. Instead, he found a palace in chaos, several empty jewellery boxes, and a note that might as well have said "sorry not sorry" written in Helen's perfect handwriting. His reaction went through several distinct phases. Phase 1, denial. She's probably just gone shopping for several days and took the royal treasury with her, and that charming Trojan prince is coincidentally also missing. This is fine. Phase 2, reality check. A servant nervously approached. "Sir, we found this poem Paris wrote. It's, rather explicit about his intentions." Also, he drew little hearts around Helen's name and wrote "Paris plus Helen forever" on several palace walls. Phase 3, the meltdown. Menelaus' scream of rage was so impressive it scared several flocks of birds out of their trees and made Zeus himself pause mid-lightning bolt to say not bad. Phase 4, the brother call. Like any good Greek king having a crisis, Menelaus immediately called his brother Agamemnon. The conversation went something like this. Menelaus: "They took her." Agamemnon: "Who took what now?" Menelaus: "That Trojan pretty boy took my wife." Agamemnon: "The one you were bragging about hosting last week?" Menelaus: "Yes." Agamemnon, long-suffering, sigh. "I told you to stop letting attractive foreign princes stay over." Phase 5, the oath calling. Remember that oath all of Helen's former suitors took? The one where they promised to defend her marriage to whoever won her hand? Menelaus certainly remembered, and he started calling in those IOUs, faster than Hermes delivering urgent messages. He sent messengers to every Greek king who had signed that oath, essentially saying, "Remember that thing you promised? Yeah, it's collection time. Bring your armies, your ships, and your best 'we're about to start a massive war' face." The responses varied. Odysseus tried to get out of it by pretending to be crazy, ploughing his fields with salt until Palamedes put his baby son in front of the plough. "Fine, I'll come to your stupid war, but I want it noted that I think this is a terrible idea." Achilles was basically like, "Finally, something interesting is happening," and started packing his favourite armour before the messenger finished talking. Ajax just grunted and started sharpening his extremely large sword. Meanwhile, Agamemnon, seeing an opportunity to become the commander of the largest Greek army ever assembled, took charge of the situation. He started organising what would become known as the greatest military expedition of the age, though his enthusiasm might have had more to do with potential conquest than brotherly love. The preparation for war was massive. 1,000 ships were gathered at Aulis, which seemed like overkill until someone pointed out they needed room for everyone's egos. Every Greek kingdom sent their best warriors, their finest weapons, and their most dramatic war cries. Menelaus spent this time alternating between rage-filled speeches about honour and dignity, and moping around showing everyone portraits of Helen asking, "But doesn't she look happy with me in this one?" And somewhere on Mount Olympus, Eris was already planning where to put her best chaos-created trophy, while Aphrodite maintained that she was just helping true love find its way, even if that way happened to go through several major military campaigns. And so, from a single uninvited guest at a divine wedding, and one perfectly timed golden apple, the following chaos ensued. 3 goddesses started a feud that would last millennia. The most beautiful woman in Greece eloped with a shepherding enthusiast. 1,000 ships were launched. Troy got an unexpected renovation via wooden horse. Countless heroes got their chance to be dramatically tragic. Epic poetry got enough material to last forever. Back at the original wedding reception, which was still technically ongoing because divine parties never really end, Eris sat back in her chaos throne, sipping a cocktail garnished with a tiny golden apple slice. "You know," she mused to her ravens, who had traded their top hats for tiny war helmets, "some might say crashing a wedding is rude, but I prefer to think of it as giving everyone a story to tell." And that's why to this day, when someone mentions wedding crashers, the gods get a nervous twitch and automatically check for any suspicious golden fruit in the vicinity. The moral of the story: sometimes not getting a wedding invitation can lead to the greatest party crash of all time. Just make sure you bring the right party favour, preferably one that can start a war.